Hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen, an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa. I prepare these videos weekly for a twofold purpose. First of all, to help take my brain out of percolation mode as I've been thinking and pondering on the sermon text for the week, and I move it into what I call sermonation mode as I'm actually writing and preparing the sermon that I will preach to my congregation on this coming Sunday. The second purpose for these videos is to allow you, the viewer, who've stumbled across this digital doorstep for whatever reason, whether you're a common viewer or you just happen to find it, to allow you to gain some different insight into the texts from the Gospels that are lined out or assigned by the Revised Common Lectionary, organizational tool that divides up Scripture into usable passages over a 3-year cycle. Lost train of thought there. But so that's why we make these videos. This coming Sunday, which is June 21st, 2015, the fourth Sunday after Pentecost, our assigned gospel text is Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. This is a direct continuation of the gospel text from last week, in which Jesus was teaching some crowds, told a couple of small parables, and then we heard just a little bit of narration regarding Jesus' use of parables within the text a week ago. So now this continues directly from there. And it says, "On that same day when evening had come, Jesus said to the disciples, 'Let us go across to the other side.' Leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, 'Teacher, are you not aware, or Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' He woke up and rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, 'Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?' And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, 'Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" That's the text for this week. So, as I mentioned, Jesus has been teaching. The crowds are there. He's been telling parables because, as we heard a week ago, that's how he taught the crowds. He utilized metaphors, probably, are the best way to describe a parable, things that they would be familiar with to help them try and comprehend, try and understand a little bit more about the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, and the work that God is up to in the world through Christ. So that's been going on. Now it's the same day. When it's evening of that day, he says, "Hey, let's cross the Sea of Galilee." Now the Sea of Galilee, they call it a sea. It's actually, I believe, a freshwater lake that's within the region of Palestine. Never been there, so I can't tell you exactly, but I believe that's the case. It's not a real huge body of water, but it's good sized. It's about 3 miles across, and kind of serves actually as a portion of the border between what, at least in Jesus' day, of what they would consider to be the region of Israel or Judah, and then more of a Gentile region on the other side. Gennesaret is the region that's across the sea from where they're talking about. And so that's just kind of a geographical type situation of what's going on here. If you're on the western side of the sea, then you're in the Jewish area, and it wasn't strictly Jewish, of course. At this time, there was a big mix of cultures at that time with the Roman Empire that was in effect at that time. But on the other side would definitely be considered to be a Gentile area, just not a Jewish stronghold. So there's kind of that to be aware of. And so it's that same day Jesus has been teaching, and he says when evening had come, they decided to set out in the boat to go to the other side. So now some things that are interesting about the Sea of Galilee. Again, like I said, freshwater lake. A lot of activity goes on there. A lot of fishing happens in there. In fact, the Sea of Galilee is where at least Peter, James, Andrew, and John, I mixed up the brother sets there. Peter and Andrew and James and John are from there. They live on the shoreline. They're fishermen by trade. It's on the sea where they made their living. And so they're out on the water a lot. They're familiar with being out on the water, particularly at night. Fishing happened at night for whatever reason, and I can't tell you why. I don't know, but fishing happened at night. So at least for these four guys, this would have been a familiar type of situation, and not unheard of for them to, in the evening, get in the boat and head out across the water. Now, keep in mind, no motors. You wanted to move, you either put up a sail and caught the wind, or you got the oars out. That's just that was the option. There were no outboards at that time. So to cross the lake is going to take some time. You're going to row yourself across 3 miles of water, and it was very, very common for storms to come up kind of out of nowhere. Just that was common out on the water, and so you could be out there in the water and everything was fine, and then suddenly out of nowhere, big wind comes up, big wind and waves, and it can get pretty dangerous out there. That's the situation that happens within this story. As we hear, they're out in the water. It's now nighttime, and I don't know how long it would have normally have taken them to row across the water. You wouldn't think it would be a tremendous amount of time, but probably a fair amount of time. And or perhaps they were rowing, more lengthwise of the lake. Again, we don't know. But Jesus falls asleep. We hear that he's sleeping in the stern. Now the stern is actually where the rudder would be, or that helps guide, that directs the boat, particularly if they're sailing, which perhaps they are. So he's in an important spot, actually one of the most important spots of the person, or in the position to guide the boat. And what's he doing? Well, Jesus is sleeping. Then out of nowhere, this big storm comes up that we hear about. Now, as I mentioned, at least those 4 disciples, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, are fishermen. And as I talked about, they are out on the sea at night. They've been through storms before. I guarantee it. It would have been part of their day-to-day making a living. Or I could say their night-to-night making a living. They've experienced it before. These guys know what they're doing. They've been fishermen for a while. They've clearly survived to this point because they're still alive. And so they've been through storms. They know what to do. They know how to handle it. Now the other 8 disciples, maybe not. They've got all kinds of different roles or different backgrounds. Some of them perhaps are also fishermen. So maybe they've been in the water too. Some of them maybe not so much, but at least some of them should know what's going on. And so this giant storm comes up, and the disciples are freaking out. They are just absolutely losing their minds. The best way I can describe it, and you'll have to pardon my French with what I'm about to say, but there's no better way, in my opinion, to describe it. The disciples lose their shit, and they think we're done. The waves are coming over the boat. The boat's being swamped. The wind is just going crazy. They think they're dead. They think that this is the end, and that they're finished. They're not going to survive this one. So they wake up Jesus, and to them, here's Jesus sitting in the boat. Here's our master. Here's our teacher. The one that we're following around. He doesn't even seem to care. Now, we've seen what he can do. We've seen the miracles that he's done, the healings that he's done. We've seen the exorcisms that he's done. We've heard the teachings. We know that he's from God, and he says that he is God, and he doesn't care. We're dying, and here he is sleeping. When he's the one who should be saving us, he's the one who should be guiding us through this, and he just doesn't care. He's sleeping. And I could only imagine. I picture this in my head. Of course, I wasn't there. I don't know exactly how it happened, but so Jesus wakes up, takes a look, puts his hand up, he commands it, and it's a double command. He says, "Peace, be still." And it's the Greek is actually basically the same word there, and it escapes me what it is. But he says it twice, and perhaps he's saying it to the wind, and then he's saying it to the waves, because we hear that the wind stops immediately, and that the waves stop, and we have it's a great calm. Now I don't know what a great calm is. You think a calm. The waves go flat. I mean, picture if you've ever seen a lake no ripples at all. It's glass. That's what happens, and it's in an instant. And so then he says to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you no faith? I'm with you, and no matter what happens, I am still with you. Believe that." Perhaps that's what Jesus is saying there. Not so much that did you think that I would not protect you? Did you think that I do not care? But have faith. I am here. No matter what happens, I'm still here. And they are filled with great awe. Well, that great awe is great fear. Again, Greek. They're terrified of. I mean, imagine to yourself if you are with someone who controls the weather, something that we have zero control over. And wouldn't that freak you out? Wouldn't you be a little afraid of that person, of the power that lies within them? I think that's what's going on with the disciples. Now, all that being said, as I think about this, and as I mentioned before, the disciples, at least the four of them, who just lose it over this storm, who lose their ability to remain calm, who lose their ability to deal with the situation. How big must have this storm have been? How immense? How strong? How totally overwhelming must this particular storm have been for them to just lose it like they do and to think that they're done? And that puts me in mind of those things that occur, those things that happen that remind us of how powerless we are. Those things that remind us how small we are. Those things that are gonna, what they do, it's gonna happen, and nothing we can say or do is gonna stop it. For the disciples, it was the storm. I've heard it described as, a powerful earthquake. The ground is shaking, and what's gonna happen is gonna happen. Or a tidal wave as it comes in. Tsunamis that we've seen in recent history. That wave comes in, and you're at its mercy. Or great storms like a tornado or a hurricane. Now, I've lived through a hurricane. But yet it was not a super strong one. It was, we were in a well-protected building. So to me, it just kind of seemed like a thunderstorm, and it was not that immense. So I haven't experienced that powerless feeling against like a storm, but just think about those things in life, those things in creation that remind us of how small and how fragile we are. It could be those things that I mentioned before. Perhaps it's staring at the base of a mountain, looking up at it and just seeing how big it is, or standing on the seashore, looking out over the ocean. Or another one that I think of is the TV show Deadliest Catch. Love that show. It's about crab fishermen out in the Bering Sea, and they talk. They're on 115, 130 foot boat in the middle of the ocean. And if something goes wrong, and there are countless things that go wrong, help is not going to get there. They're at the mercy of nature's fury. Just those things that remind us how small we are. And probably where I'm going to go with the sermon on that is that there are forces in the world, and not just these natural forces, but the supernatural forces, the power of sin, the power of death, these powers that are within creation that we are no match for, that we have no control over. The power of sin is a big one. For the Apostle Paul, he talks about not sin in terms of like individual things that we do, like you stub your toe and you swear or whatever. But the power of sin, it is something that's at work within the world. And what's the basis for it? Well, who knows? I mean, that's a big, long theological debate. But we're powerless against it. And yet, as we look at this situation and recognize that under our own power we are nothing and we are subject to it, look back at the story and what happens. Jesus is there. Jesus calms it. Jesus saves them from what they are powerless to stop, what they are powerless to save themselves from. And it's already done. And when we think about what Jesus does for the disciples, it's mirrored in what Jesus has done for us on the cross, those powers of sin that we have no control over, that we cannot stand against, Jesus has already done something about it. And that's the glory of the gospel. So that's what's happening in this story. I really enjoy this story. It's a pretty well-known one, but that's probably the direction I'm going to go with the sermon this week. So if you have any thoughts or questions or comments, please, by all means, pop those down into the comments section. I love to hear from you when those comments show up, and we can continue the conversation. If you've got some different insights, some different ideas, maybe you think, Scott, I don't quite get where you're going, or I don't quite agree with it. Hey, share that. Let's continue the conversation. Otherwise, I hope that you have a blessed week, that God is with you this week, and that all goes well for you. If not, well, I don't know where I'm going with that. But have a wonderful week, and we'll catch you next time.